Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I am Stacy Benge and I am an early childhood speaker and presenter, and my specialty is child development, just overall the whole child from birth to 5. And I am joined today by Dr. Emily McGahey, who is a pediatric occupational therapist. So Emily, tell us, what is an occupational therapist? What is an OT?
Yeah, so a pediatric occupational therapist, we deal with the whole child as well. So we're looking at their fine motor skills, their sensory processing, how they're able to function in life. And so that's, as a child, a lot of time their play skills, their physical development, and their ability to participate with peers. And so we look at kind of what areas are helping them or hindering them in that to help them to be able to function in all of those environments at home and at school, and on the playground and so on and so forth.
And I do want to bring up, Emily, tell everybody how we know each other.
I'm your niece.
Yeah.
Niece.
So if you're looking at the screen going, okay, these girls kind of look similar. We are related. Emily is my brother's daughter, so I am her aunt. And so I did want to bring that up because Emily and I, over the years, have had many conversations about child development. We go on vacations together, and she and I analyze playgrounds. And
Oh, yes.
she was just in New York and sent me pictures over the weekend of some amazing playgrounds she saw at Central Park, right?
Yeah, I was in Central Park. My friends probably thought I was crazy. I was like, hold on, I need to go take a picture of these for my aunt.
Yeah. So we have a lot of conversations like that. So I asked Emily this week, I think we actually have talked before about doing some, just some recordings or some lives of this nature. But what really prompted us this week is a couple weeks ago, the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics changed the developmental milestones for children in child development. And there are some things on there that have been a little bit controversial, and I'm still reading and learning about it. I think their rationale had good intentions, but they're getting some kickback, especially from occupational and physical therapists and speech and language pathologists as well. And we didn't want to go too far off on that because I think we could go on a rabbit hole of our professional beliefs and research that probably does oppose some of the decisions that were made. But one of the things that was taken off as a developmental milestone was crawling. And this is something that, of course, Emily being an OT, and then me, my love of language and literacy and physical development and how that all ties together. And to me, the root of a lot of that is children crawling. It's so important. So I have been watching a lot of the what comments people are making back and forth, and I reached out to Emily just, I guess, a couple days ago and said, hey, do you want to record a session on the importance of crawling, and especially from somebody who is an expert in occupational therapy, and just to kind of get some good information out there for parents and for educators as well. So thanks, Emily, for joining me and taking this time.
Happy to be here.
So we know, just again, based on research evidence, and then I would say professional opinions from both you and I, that crawling is very important. It is a critical skill. It very much taps into children's physical development, their brain development, sensory, and just overall child development. So it's not just something that you tick off or you do before you go to walking. It actually develops so much in the child. So I'm going to kind of hand it over to you and just let you tell us why is crawling important? How does it affect development? And why is it important that children crawl?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in my professional opinion, crawling is probably one of the most major milestones as it relates to fine motor, gross motor, and sensory processing development. And so, just to go a little bit more into that, like the why is crawling important? We see that in physical development, it helps to develop both the gross motor and the fine motor. So as far as gross motor, you're going to see them building stronger trunk and shoulder girdle muscles, which are responsible then later for their posture and their handwriting. and their balance and so much more. So if they don't develop those properly as a baby, you're going to see that trickle effect into those later milestones as well. And then bimotor wise, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but if they don't have this is called their proximal strength. So the whole arm strength they need stabilized, get to the point where they like hold a pencil. A lot of times when they skip crawling, they haven't developed the shoulder girdle, they haven't developed the grip strength that they need. And then crawling also just develops the arches of the hand, which is really important when you go to like learn how to manipulate little things like buttons to put on your clothes or how to hold a pencil. And so much more within that physical development range. But as far as brain development too, it helps really mainly with that bilateral coordination. So that's your ability to use both sides of the body together. And so as you do the reciprocal, which is that side to side, back and forth crawling movement, it's connecting both the right and the left side of the brain, which we know is so important for the way that they develop their learning, their ability to learn, and their ability to read, their ability to move their body, and their coordination overall. And it's also really important for their body awareness as a whole. So when they're crawling, they're learning, okay, this is how my body moves in space. And they're also learning how to be independent and explore their environments, which helps just get sensory input through their hands, helps them learn, if I move this way, this is what my body feels like. And they learn kind of like those, it's called like writing reactions. So learning how to really just learn where their body is like spatially as they are sitting or as they're moving into that 4-point position, which they use for crawling. And it also just helps develop really those visual tracking skills. So when they're crawling, they're typically like reaching for things, they're looking side to side. And these skills are needed later on when they're learning how to read or when you're learning how to reach for a toy, properly manipulate things. And so that's also another skill that's developed through that crawling. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on really briefly is that primitive reflexes. And so a lot of people aren't really quite familiar with those, and maybe we'll touch on them more on a later date. But basically, you have these primitive reflexes as a baby that are important to help with safety, and they're helpful in learning how to move your body and those really progress through the developmental milestones. But if you don't do crawling, typically there's one called the STNR, which stands for this symmetrical tonic neck reflex, and that doesn't get integrated properly without crawling.
And the primitive reflexes is something I honestly didn't really know about until both of my boys, who are adults now, and they know that I talk about them a lot. So I have free permission from both of them to talk about, kind of their journey. But they both did occupational and physical therapy, especially my oldest son. He did pretty extensive OT and PT for about 4 years, which is where I went to Emily and we're like, you've got to look at this field. This is a profession you need to look at.
I got into OT, so thank you.
Yeah. But the primitive reflexes are something that I think that we in mainstream, whether as parents or as educators, don't know a whole lot about. And so I'm always fascinated, like talking with you, how you said how you can watch a child move and you can see if they still have those primitive reflexes. You and I were kind of talking before we started recording. How many children on your caseload do you feel still have some of those reflexes that should have already integrated?
Yeah, so by the time if they come to see me later on, like a lot of my children on my caseload currently are like elementary age. And I would say probably like 99% of kids that end up on my caseload later on still go to test them, have one or more of those primitive reflexes still. So.
And how does that affect them now? Like what is that kind of, why is it important that those integrate?
It's a number of reasons depending on like which is still present, but a lot of times they become really poorly coordinated. They have a hard time sitting at the table attending to tasks, or like, for example, there's one called ATNR, which is that pincer pose where you turn their head and they're going to go like this. You'll see that in babies sometimes because it's supposed to be present in babies. And then if it's not integrated, I'll see kids at the tabletop and they can't, when they go to write, they have to hold their head up because their body naturally wants to do this. And so they don't even realize that they're doing it because it's subtle, but it can help. I mean, it can harm their ability to just attend, sit at midline at the table where they need to be in order to produce that academic work. And yeah, a lot of those are the main things that I'll see.
And I want to make sure that we clarify when we say that the reflexes are integrated, what does that exactly mean?
It's integrated, that means that it has properly like disappeared. So babies will have it for a certain amount of time, depending on which reflex it is. So for example, 18R you're supposed to have from 1 to 4 months, I believe. And then after 4 months, you want it to disappear. So it's supposed to be present for a period of time, and then you want it gone after that.
And I had it explained to me one time. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like those reflexes are there in the beginning for survival purposes.
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
really is a human nature thing. But then as the brain develops and the body can become more in command of itself, more intentional, those reflexes are no longer needed. So they
Right.
kind of disappear, fade out. So, okay, is that correct?
That's exactly what I would say. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I've told other people that too. So I want to make sure it's good.
You're on the right track. Good.
Okay. Okay. So before we kind of move on, a couple of things that you said, I do not like talking about school readiness. Or let me rephrase. I don't like that early childhood is defined by school readiness. I think it is so much more, and you and I, again, are both the whole child, the whole human. But I do want to touch on this is, several things that you said as far as we're crawling, it develops, this, the neck and the torso and the shoulders, and that supports, handwriting, the ability to cross midline. So would you say that crawling is an essential skill for future academics? And again, I just want to say that because that's what a lot of people are talking about. So go ahead.
I agree with you. I know where you're on this. So
yeah.
but I would say it's pretty foundational. So if we look at why is it an essential skill, it's because it's that developmental progression. So it's that domino effect where it's like if we don't crawl, we don't develop these skills that are needed for later on skills. And so in my opinion, it is pretty essential to school readiness and academic learning, which you're going to need later on as they go into those elementary school years and beyond.
Right. And I can speak to as a parent whose son struggled in school. One of the first things that we really tapped into was the physical development not quite being there, and the neck and the torso not being fully developed, and the core not being strengthened, and the inability to cross midlines, which things that you were talking about this earlier in the reciprocal movement, and the ability to hold one side of your one hand stationary while you're moving the other. We use that all the time, as adults, but in the classroom as well. But speaking as a parent whose son really struggled with that, I think once we got him in OT and PT and we started developing those skills and working on it, it vastly improved his performance in the classroom. And, I felt like he was trying to be pigeonholed into other things. And my parent instinct was like, no, I feel there's something going on, watching him trying to sit in a chair. And it was just so eye-opening on how important just our body's development is for academic performance. And as adults too, us sitting here talking, we have command of our body, it's fully developed, but it goes back to when we were children. So
yeah. And I'll say that a lot of times parents will come to me and be like, I want my kid to be able to write. Their concern is handwriting a lot of times because the teachers will say they're really sloppy, X, Y, and Z, and I have to go back and educate. I'm like, okay, we're not starting with handwriting. We got to start with their core strength, or we got to start with their proximal stability of their shoulder. We got to start with their body awareness because they don't even know where they are when they're sitting in the seat. So obviously they're not going to be able to write effectively. And you have to go back to the foundations piece, which a lot of people just aren't even aware of, I'd say.
And crawling is
so important to that foundation. I can't.
Yeah. Which I think again is why everybody's like, oh my gosh, why was that taken off?
And I'll say, like, a lot of times, I think I was going to talk about this later, but I will make kids go back and crawl. So they'll come to me at 7 years old and we will do a lot of activities where we're playing games and stuff because, especially if they've skipped it, we need to go back and develop those foundational skills.
Right. And, and something else too, before we go on to the next, kind of the next section we talked about, discussing, um, the other day when I was working out, like I really kind of started thinking about like if you do any type of strength training, Pilates or yoga, how many, especially in Pilates and in yoga, that you are in a plank position or you are on all fours where your knees are hovering, but so many of those workout regimes put us back in that position
Mhm.
of a child crawling. And I don't know, that was like, because we need to kind of still keep working those muscles and those skills. But I'm like,
Yeah.
even as adults, it worked its way in. So,
I'll give parents like home exercises of getting in boat position or getting in quadruped, which is you're on all fours, that position used for crawling. And
uh-huh.
the parents be like, I need to work on this too. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, it's okay.
Do it all together.
Yeah.
So, okay, kind of going on to something else that you and I had talked about, bringing up in the discussion is when I've been, as I've been reading a lot of the feedback and I've been on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, I've had conversations with some of my other colleagues and I think it's worth saying, when we talk about research, we want our practices to be rooted in evidence and research that's been deemed valid and reliable.
Mhm.
And so, and that means that there's a consensus that's been peer reviewed. It's we go, yes, this is good research. But what happens is everybody has an anecdotal story.
Mhm.
And no matter what field, whatever, there will always be an anecdotal story or two that does not align because nothing's 100%. But then people start throwing around, well, my child never crawled and they're just fine. Or why are we so worried about this? Is it really? So, what would you say about children who do skip crawling? Like, what do you see, in your practice, and then kind of, what are your feelings on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, there are exceptions to the rule, but as a whole, like we touched on before, there's so many benefits to crawling that to me, it's so important not to skip it. And there's a number of reasons that kids do skip it. It can be their arm or their core, sometimes hip weakness. It could be visual deficits that are limiting their eye-hand coordination, so they're just not able to move their body that way. They don't understand how to. Sometimes it's
Wait, okay, you kind of froze for a second. Will you repeat what you just said? Because I want to make sure that was not missed.
Yeah, do you want me to go back from the beginning of the reasons?
Yeah, go ahead and list them again. Yeah, because
Yeah.
you kind of froze, and I think this is really important.
Okay. So, I mean, I just said that babies crawling for reasons. So sometimes it's because their arm or their hips are weak. Sometimes it's because of a visual deficit, so that limits their ability for their eye-hand coordination, and so they can't quite figure out how to move their body in that position, the pattern. And sometimes it's because of like a muscle tightness, or the opposite, low muscle tone, and so they can't engage those muscles properly. And then sometimes there's a lack of floor play. They're not exposed, and so they don't really know how to turn around and get their body in that position just because they've been put in. I like to call them containers. I know you've probably used that term before.
I say that term
So they
too. Yeah.
don't even know where they are in space. And so there's always an underlying reason to me of why they're skipping crawling. And so because of that, whatever the reason is, we want to address the root problem because it's going to have that trickle effect like we talked about. And so as much as possible, we want to prevent them skipping this step so they don't have first those immediate effects and those long-term effects that we talked about before of how they're going to be delayed in other milestones because of that.
And would you say that if a child does skip crawling, that this might be something that you don't see the effect of until maybe they're 8, 9, 10 years old? Would you say that, or?
Yeah, sometimes because immediately, like they may move on to the next step, walking. Sometimes in that standing position, it's actually easier because they're able to lock out their joints. And so sometimes kids that are weaker will actually go to standing first, and everyone's like, "Oh, they're so strong," and I'm like, actually they're probably maybe weaker. And so, yeah, a lot of times they'll skip it and they'll progress through those next couple of developmental milestones. But then as they start getting into school and the rigor gets harder, you'll notice the effects.
Okay. And I think that's, found that very interesting that sometimes you think, oh, well, they skipped crawling and but you're like, no, it could be that they're compensating for
Exactly.
something there, and so,
I'm like, there's
and
always a reason. Like, we want to get to the root reason why they skipped it.
yeah. And like you even mentioned earlier, even like, with your elementary age children that you're working with, that you go back to a lot of crawling and
We do.
uh, when my son, I know when he was like 10 years old and the OT we used said a lot of the same things you said. We're going back to square one. We're completely going back to the beginning, and all the crawling and stuff they had my son doing, and just and what I love, and this is where I learned so much about OT, because I would pick their brains. I'm like, okay, tell me, why did you do this? And
Yeah.
and it really changed my perspective on early childhood education, and that why child-led play is so important, and why just having children on the floor playing, because a lot of times that naturally puts them into that crawling
Mhm.
position, and they're moving around and they're reaching across, and just the visual component as well.
Yeah. So the other day, I had a friend come to me and they were concerned about their babies crawling, that the parents weren't concerned. And they're like, should I say something? And I'm like, it's always better to address it now, because she was just doing this little scoop pattern and it could have been a little weakness or whatnot. But I'm like, the fix at that point is so much simpler. So why not fix it in the moment versus having to worry about what it could do later on?
So would you recommend then, like, if you do have the baby who's scooting, would that, constitute seeking out an OT evaluation? Would you recommend that?
Yeah, I would go seek an OT or a physical therapist evaluation. They honestly have more experience in actual different types of crawling patterns, and they're going to be able to tell you like what the weakness is, if it's hip weakness or core weakness. Um, yeah, so to me, my greatest advice would be to parents, like, if you have any concern at all in their delay or the type of crawling they're doing just some atypical little pattern, just go seek the evaluation.
And and I do want to add on that, like, and we were kind of talking about this earlier. If you do go see your pediatrician and they say wait and see, but if your parent, you're like, in my gut, I'm feeling this. What do you say to that?
A lot of times pediatricians will say exactly that. They'll be like, well, we'll just wait and see. They're still within the range or whatnot. And to me, it's always better to just go seek the evaluation. So just go see, and then at that point, you can make the decision for your child what you want to do with that. If you sometimes you don't even have to be in physical therapy or occupational therapy, though they could just give you a simple thing like do this at home. And so I'm not a parent yet, but I assume that when I would become a parent one day, hopefully, that I would want to just know like what to do. Just have
Right.
the information. So
I always found, like, when I was teaching and working with parents, and sometimes if I'd ask a parent, hey, have you seen this? And I even had this as a parent, but a lot of times you just go, I didn't know to be looking for that. I did, but now that you say that, oh,
yeah,
okay, now that I'm aware, then I can adjust whatever to help my child, or whatever it may be. So,
yeah,
but I
I know.
think that's very, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of times I'm just like, why would you not go out and seek help? But I'm like, often people just don't even know, like you said, like what they're supposed to be looking for or what the typical progression is. And so they're not even aware, like, my child's a little bit delayed in this, or this may not be right. But if you have that gut instinct, like you were talking about, just go
Mhm.
seek help.
I read an article. This has been like almost 10 years ago, but it was a school psychologist. And he said that 95% of the time, when parents walked in and said, I feel this is going on, that they were right. That there,
Don't doubt that.
yeah, there really is a parental instinct. So, and, and keep in mind, like our medical professionals, our specialists, They're there to help guide you, but I think what you said, what you choose to do with that information
Mhm.
is that, that's your choice. But I do think it's important that parents know that you can seek an evaluation with an OT, a PT, or a speech and language pathologist um, on your own. So if you are feeling that, and I do want to mention real quick on like the on the milestones, which was kind of what prompted this, but keep in mind milestones are approximations and they're not definite. Now, part of the controversy is they've been pushed back so much that there's a little bit of a worry that that is going to affect the early intervention, but there's always a little bit of a range. And so that's why I think it's important that you're always speaking with professionals and just kind of being aware. Would you add anything else to that?
I think that was great. Great point to just touch on that there is a range within all those with crawling being included. And so it's not like the previous milestone was around 9 months. Now it is no longer, but
Yeah, now it's not even there.
I was about to say 9 months, but in my head it is.
Yeah,
That if they're slightly before, slightly after, it's not always a concern, but there's just looking for those kind of ranges like you were talking about, and
yeah,
not being like, oh my goodness, there's something wrong when they're 9 months and a day and they're not doing this yet. It's okay. There's
yeah,
built for everything. There's a range of what each child does, and it's not this like systematic
right.
sequence to it. But yeah.
Yeah. And I am going to add this into like seeking, if you are feeling something, seeking from an OT and a PT or an SLP, which is speech language pathologist, because now the evaluation measures that are being used in your specialties no longer align with the new guidelines. So, so I really encourage, if you feel something or you're a little, go to the OTPT or SLP. And that's just my personal professional belief, and take it for what it's worth. So
I tell parents all the time, well, they'll ask me if they should go seek some neuropsych eval or do this testing in the school. And I'm always like, I just encourage it. Just get the results. And then you can, like we said, do with that what you wish. You're
yeah,
still it. You still get to be an active participant in your child's development and that role, but just get the information because
yeah.
early intervention is always best, in my opinion.
Well, and you have the right to your opinion. I mean, like, meaning like you have the clout to go, and this is good. Yeah.
I would say.
So, I always tell Emily she knows all the things, and
I don't know, but I always tell you sometimes knowledge is hard. So we talk about that too.
well, and it's, it is, yeah. Sometimes you're like, oh gosh, I just, but knowledge is power, and it's,
That's true as well.
So are there any like just in conclusion, anything else you want to touch on, specifically or especially on crawling, or any other advice you would give parents?
I think we've touched on most of it, just really just going back and thinking about the importance of the skills that are developed through crawling. And so it's just so comprehensive of that child's whole physical development, brain development, their overall just child development and sensory processing, how they're able to interact with the world, that just because crawling has been taken away as one of those milestones, according to the CDC, it does not mean that they should, in my opinion, does not mean that crawling doesn't matter anymore. In fact, it's still probably one of the most essential milestones. So I would just keep that in mind as you are raising children, having children in your classroom, whatnot. But
And you said that you had mentioned earlier that you would say probably majority of your colleagues would say,
yeah, we were talking about the other day. I was like, maybe you shouldn't get a lot of OTs and PTs in the same room talking about milestones. But
well, I do think that when the committee was formed, that OTs, PTs, and SLPs, and probably cognition specialists, and I think a lot of other experts should have been part of the conversation. the
Yeah.
conversation's going now, so maybe, maybe changes will happen. So, I think, and I truly believe everybody's intent was good. Like, I don't feel that there was any, but I think it's like going, oh, maybe we didn't think about that. So,
For sure.
and I would just kind of like, as we finish up, I will just kind of like, tack on for like parents. And then if you're a caregiver, or, working with children birth to 5, getting them on the floor, getting them out of those holding devices, out of the containers, which those are like the mumbo seats, the bouncers, the exercisers. Getting children on the floor is probably the best advice I can give you, and just letting them, their bodies were designed to develop a natural and certain way. And we've got to create environments that are conducive to that. So, so that would probably be my advice. So, anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. We covered a lot today. So I feel
We
like
really did.
things that we could go deeper into. Maybe a later date we will. But
And so, if you're watching this, whatever platform, let us know any questions you may have, or something you're like, oh, I'd want some more information on that. And I think we should do more of these more often, Emily.
about
Doc E. I think we should definitely, because like I said, especially now, this everybody's like, wait, what? And we're like, nope, let's get some good information out there. So, well, thank you. And, like I said, anybody watching, let us know if you have any other questions. And I think we'll be back at some point.
thanks again for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.